the Chinese people and community?
Biologically, I don't know, what does that mean exactly? My parents were from Japan, so I'm Japanese American. So I have no biological connection to the Chinese, although my first wife was of Chinese ancestry. So I don't know how that counts.
When the American government compensated for imprisonment of the Japanese people during World War II, do you think it was enough?
Enough?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you mean the compensation?
Mm-hmm.
No, we lost, went into incarceration in 1942, and then the incarceration was completed or called off in December of 1944. And during 1945, then people of Japanese ancestry were allowed to return to the west coast of the United States. So there was 3 to 4 years of our lives that were obliterated, and compensation of $20,000 for that period of time is meaningless. Although it was very helpful, you know. There were a few people that refused it, but most people of Japanese ancestry accepted the compensation of $20,000 because it helped pay for a lot of different things. At that period of time, I belonged to an organization called Oregon Nikkei Endowment, and we were incorporated in 1988. And during that period of time, 1988 to 1990, our organization constructed the Japanese American Historical Plaza, which is part of North Waterfront Park on the west side of the river. And a lot of the compensation went to that particular project.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Sakamoto, you said in 1945 the Japanese were allowed to turn to the west coast. Did you say of Japan or America?
West coast of the United States.
All right, thank you.
So through Executive Order 9066, which started the incarceration, the Army declared that the west coast of the United States from the Pacific Ocean to 200 miles inland, people of Japanese ancestry were forbidden to be in that area, were excluded.
What do Americans think of Japanese people today that has changed from the 1940s?
There's a long history of race prejudice in the United States, and during my growing up phase, up until 1942, when we went into incarceration, our parents were always telling us to behave ourselves, don't act unseemly, or don't bring shame to the family or to your name or to your face, because there is race prejudice out there. And so we grew up with race prejudice staring us in the face. And then with the incarceration, of course, it was a violation of many violations of the United States Constitution. Because of the incarceration, it was just like being put in jail. And normally, according to the Constitution of the United States, if you're going to be put in jail, then you have to be subject to trial, due process of law. We were incarcerated without due process of law. under Executive Order 9066. So there are many unconstitutional acts that were committed against people of Japanese ancestry simply because of their ancestry. And that's blatant race prejudice. I think, well, let me add that later on, as see, I'm second generation Japanese American in the United States. Well, my children are third generation Japanese American, and then they're fourth generation. As time went on, as the third and fourth generation of Japanese Americans went through college and learned more about the incarceration, many of them became incensed, and many of them went to law school and decided that there should be some redress for the violations of the Constitution against people of Japanese ancestry. So it was 1988, Congress passed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, under which the United States government apologized to people of Japanese ancestry for the internment or incarceration. And then in 1990, President Bush signed the act which gave us the $20,000 of redress. So there was a kind of compensation for the race prejudice, but that doesn't deny the fact that race prejudice existed, and I would say that it still exists today.
Mr. Sakamoto, sorry. What propelled you into action?
Excuse me?
What propelled you into action?
Propelled into action? You have to excuse me, I have hearing aids. Sometimes I have difficulty hearing. Propelled me into action. Well, the fact of the matter is that even though World War II was a very significant part of American history, many of the history books and textbooks, and even textbooks for law schools, mention very little about the incarceration of people of Japanese ancestry during World War II. And so therefore, as I discovered that, as I talked to different groups of people such as yourselves, I decided that I'll do whatever I can to help educate the public about the unconstitutional acts of the United States government against people of Japanese ancestry. So there are many lessons to be learned as a result of our incarceration. And not too long ago, I can't think of his name, Mr. Eldon Rosenthal, who's a civil rights attorney, and he addressed a group of Japanese Americans one day, and he said that the United States Patriot Act, which is in force right now, he said, under that act, the President of the United States can deem anyone guilty of being against the United States government, and therefore, once that declaration is made, that person can be swept off and put in jail without due process of law. And Mr. Rosenthal said that the United States Patriot Act, with that conditioning, has the largest potential for unconstitutional acts since the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. So the United States Patriot Act is a living document, And people should know that it's a dangerous document as well if it's not administered correctly.
Was your family or parents in internment camp?
Yeah, right. Yeah, we were in internment camp. We were, the way it worked in 1942 is that, maybe I've got a, well, under Executive Order 9066, the United States government said that all people of Japanese ancestry will have to be away from the West Coast. And in order to do that, they issued this exclusion order and saying that in 1 week's time, you have to report. People here in Portland had to report to what we called the Portland Assembly Center. At that time, it was called the Pacific International Livestock and Exposition Center. And presently, it is the home for the Expo Center. So that area incarcerated about 3,700 people of Japanese ancestry from the Portland area. So that was in May of 1942, we had to report in 1 week's time from the time that this notice was posted. And we could only bring along what we could carry. And so, therefore, we had to abandon a lot of personal property. And if you can imagine, if when you visit the Expo Center, you can imagine that whole area surrounded by barbed wire fences and patrolled by armed military guards. And that place housed, like I said, 3,700 people of Japanese ancestry. And then we stayed there until September of that year. Then we were transferred to the internment camp in Idaho, in southeast Idaho, near Twin Falls, Idaho. And this is a outline of the internment camp in Idaho. And each of these represents a block. A block consisted of 12 barracks, a mess hall, laundry room, and shower rooms. And each single barrack was divided into 6 family units, or 6 rooms, separate rooms, that would house one family. And they had different sized rooms for different sized families. And we had no running water in the barrack. We had to go to the central bathroom to get water if we wanted it. So yeah, we suffered the internment. We lived in Block 32, which is about this territory there. So this internment camp or incarceration camp in Minidoka, Idaho, housed approximately 10,000 people of Japanese ancestry. Roughly 4,000 from the Portland or Oregon area, and then 6,000 from the Seattle or Washington area. So we suffered the internment incarceration until the end of 1944.
And was that you and your mother and father?
Yeah, that was our whole family.
Mr. Sakamoto, what have you done to make the community a better place?
Make the community a better place?
Mm-hmm.
Well, hopefully, by talking about the Constitution, violations of the Constitution, can help make this a better place to live. if people are aware of that, the United States Constitution is there to protect them. And that